One time he said one thing to me that really blew my mind, and it was like,
do you have a goal for how many videos you want to try to put out in 2024?
I know I don't want to be an influencer long term. I know that.
What would you say about a .ai domain?
It is what I would do if I were OpenAI.
Do you think AGI is real, or do you think we're being sold some fairy dust?
Where I think I would look is...
Can you explain to me, like I'm 5, why is it that when you're in that rocket you age slow?
After a few of conversations like that, I was hooked.
There's like a lot of people that believe studying of string theory is like complete bullshit.
I mean, I think that, yeah. Yeah.
Well, Jesse, welcome to Risky Business.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it, man. This is going to be awesome.
This has been an interview that I've been looking forward to for a very long time.
Oh, man, I'm honored.
One of my closest friends, so that's a preface here. You have a very interesting background, so rather than getting into all the topics I want to discuss today, I wanted the audience and the Risky Business community to learn a little bit more about you. Yeah. And I wanted to actually start way back in your early days, and I want you to tell me what the Johns Hopkins Gifted program means to you and why maybe it was a bad decision for you in your life.
Johns Hopkins Gifted program. I'm trying to even remember. Was this the Merman thing I did? Where did you get this?
Yes.
The Merman thing I did. Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? That's a great question. And I think that was an example I used. Maybe you got that in like a HuffPost article that I wrote about, like, I think if I have any regrets, which they're not really regrets, because it's like I grew up in LA and you can't choose where you grow up, you know? But I was always kind of hypersensitive to my environment. I still am, to be honest. And I think LA was a very like tracked and careerist place, being kind of a big city, and everybody's kind of hyper aware of status and like what you're doing, what people's parents are doing. And there's kind of a lot of that like BS. And especially, you know, I went to private school, and there's a whole like private school circuit of like who's who and what's going on with it. And it's, if you're kind of sensitive to that, you get caught up in it. And I think the Merman program, which I literally had to take a beat to remember, it was an example of a thing that you go to where it makes you feel special, and it's like a gold star, and it's a little bit, you know, it's like validation or whatever. It's like,
From my understanding, it's a program for highly gifted individuals.
Right.
As they publicize.
Yeah. I like vaguely even remember it. But yeah, it's probably, you know, you might have needed to take some Mensa test to get in or something. And I did occasionally things like that as a kid, and like it just reinforces this like, I'm special, like I'm, you know, God's gift to humanity. I could do whatever I want. And then you're kind of tracked up against other kind of kids like that. And you circumvent this kind of, or you short circuit rather, this self-discovery process of just like looking within and being like, what do I like? And what do I want to do? And what makes me feel good? And what resonates with me? Instead of this like, almost like a kind of high frequency trader, like how do I like get this gold star, this like accolade, like a little bit faster than this, you know, this other person. And I think programs like that, and like even later in life, like Forbes 30 under 30, like these things, they're like these selectors that affect kids growing up because they think that's what success means. And they're bad selectors. Like they're just arbitrary. They don't really mean anything.
When did you first discover that? Because, you know, a lot of your life up until now, I would say, has been like the quintessential
I know.
selector. Like you did that. You went to Columbia University.
Yeah.
You started working at Google.
Yeah. We
can get into all of that as then now you've like, you know, worked at the family office of Peter Thiel.
Yep.
Those are pretty much the highest accolades imaginable.
It's ironic, I think. Well, it's funny, actually. Like, I think Peter has a similar story where...
Right. Stanford.
Yeah, Stanford Law. I think he was, if not valedictorian, that was like salutatorian. It's like he was up there academically.
Also, for everyone watching, we're going to talk about Peter and just mention him on a first name basis. For those that don't know, Peter Thiel is one of the most world-renowned investors on planet Earth. He's a billionaire. He's done things like he was one of the first checks into Facebook and one of the close advisors to Mark Zuckerberg in building the early days of Facebook, amongst many other sorts of investments that we'll get into, but just precursor, because we're going to say Peter a lot.
Yeah, totally. And we can't take for granted, you know, there's obviously Silicon Valley insiders or whatever know who he is. But Yeah, it's funny. He had a similar kind of story where I think, he's everything. He was like, and then I think he was supposed to clerk for the Supreme Court. I think he was going to like work for Scalia or something. And then I think that fell through. And that was like the first thing he ever lost or something. And then he ended up at Sullivan and Cromwell, this legal firm. And I think he got very disillusioned very quickly. He was like, this is where kind of the paper chase leads, like all the gold stars and accolades. This is it. And I definitely, not to compare myself, to standard deviations more impressive than me. But my point, I guess, in saying that, because you point out an irony in that, like, if you look at my resume, it just looks like a bunch of like steps up a ladder or whatever in a pretty good way. And I think some of the people who are like most competitive or like want to succeed along the track are also most sensitive to how fucked up the track is and arbitrary it is. And it's this sort of like two sides of the same coin. And I will say in my case, I do think, I learned very late because I was getting reinforced for doing well in the system for a very long time. And I think the time that really broke for me was, I mean, it slowly broke over a very long period of time. I even remember in high school reading a book called Lost in the Meritocracy by this Atlantic journalist named Walter Kern, who I've now become really close friends with, actually. And it's all about how he, is a valedictorian in high school in Minnesota. He goes to school at Princeton and he freaks out at Princeton. He's like, this is it? Like that, like this sucks. All these like haughty kids from like these Eastern Seaboard schools, and like this knowledge is like stale academic knowledge, and like this is what I was like working towards. So I remember reading that, and that article I wrote while in college. I think I was 19, the Huffington Post article where it's like, you should figure out who you are first. So I was intellectually like aware of these things, but still clearly trapped by the prestige thing. And so like the Google thing was probably, not fully convictionless. Like it was somewhat like right on like in terms of like where I could have been headed, but like it was a generically, prestigious thing to do. And then the time it really broke for me was I was 25 years old and I was at Google, and I just remember I literally remember having this thought, like my life took the wrong timeline. And I know that sounds insane because my job was like program manager and machine intelligence at Google, like something that sounds great at a cocktail party, but you feel like more like a phony, because if you're even more alienated or disenchanted with your job and it sounds prestigious, like if that delta is high, you feel even shittier on the inside, or at least I did. Like I couldn't do that. And so I was like, what am I doing? Like my job was like, I don't know, it was like this crazy sort of bridge to nowhere. Out of respect for Google, I don't want to, talk too much about it, but the line between what I was doing and like the P&L of the company was a very precarious line. And I just felt like a cog in the machine. And initially you try to kind of go Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where you're like, guys, like this doesn't make a ton of sense. We should be more productive here. But I just you learn to eat it at a certain point. And just, I think, companies like that select against, or they select against idealism in some cases. They select for expediency and just being good at politics. So I sort of ate it. And I remember just being 25, being just depressed as hell, being like, what am I doing with my life? And that's actually when I had a friend who was kind of running Google's TED Talks equivalent called Talks at Google. And he kind of gave me carte blanche. I was like, maybe I can interview people for this thing, and that'll be a generative way to like find what I do next, like kind of this Hail Mary way to figure it out. And he was like, yeah, man, if you get like a big name to come in, like you have carte blanche, like you can interview whoever you want. And so I just start cold emailing like my heroes, like finding emails and like cold email. And I want to say I did like 10 to 20 a day, like just went hard.
Wow.
And like initially nobody responded.
Interesting.
Like nobody was
Especially because
interested.
you have the Google, domain on the email address.
Totally.
Like, some prestige there.
Yeah. And I was smart enough at the time to understand leverage and like, how, kind of the Sun Tzu, a battle is won or lost before it's fought. And like, we had a platform that like, you come and speak at Google. It's a prestigious thing. And you had a big following on YouTube.
Do you remember the first person that said yes?
Maybe James Altucher, actually. He wrote a book called Choose Yourself, and he's sort of an investor and like funny, zany guy. He has a podcast too. It's similar to Tim Ferriss. I think he might have been the first guy. But I ended up interviewing a bunch of cool, like Brian Grazer, we both know Scooter Braun, interviewed him. Actually, the first thing I did was a debate between the guy who created What the Health, the Netflix documentary, kind of vegan guy, Kip, I'm blanking on his last name.
Yeah.
And Dave Asprey, who, Bulletproof Coffee.
Yeah,
He was like more kind of in the paleo camp or whatever.
Yeah.
It was like, what's the ideal diet?
Interesting.
And between them, and it did really well. I think it has like a few 100,000 views on YouTube, which for me at the time I was like, whoa, that's
Wait,
good.
so at the time you were not only doing this for internal Google staff, but you were actually creating these into videos that were going out on Google's YouTube channel?
Yeah, Toxic Google.
Google is a channel.
Exactly. Yeah, so it was, internal employees could come, and then this was this official program that my friend was helping run, and and he was just like, interview whoever. So
how many talks do you think you did in total?
I did probably 15-ish, maybe 20-ish. So not a crazy amount. But you know what? I remember those days being like the happiest day. I remember Mike Posner. I interviewed Mike Posner, and we like played horse at Google, and our mutual friend, Charlie Jabley, came, and we were like betting money on the horse and stuff. We got lunch, and I just remember being so inspired and like happy that day. Or the day I interviewed Scooter, I was like, this guy's awesome. Like, how did he do all this stuff in his life? Like, this is so cool. And it was like I was living vicariously through them, because I felt trapped in, and again, this such a luxury to say you're trapped, because it's like Disneyland for adults. It's this amazing company. And I am very grateful to Google. I think it's in many ways an amazing company. And it was probably good for me at the time, because I was kind of convictionless. You could try so many things and learn about so many things. But I was interviewing people who felt like more self-actualized than me, and they're obviously a little older, later in their careers. But those days were the best days. Like, I just felt it. And I reached out to Peter around actually coming in to speak, and he couldn't make it to speak. But, and to this day, I don't know what I said right or why he was up for this, but we ended up getting lunch and just hit it off. And then, ended up working for him till today, pretty much. Yeah.
Do you remember in some of your initial interactions with Peter what you guys talked about?
I think we shared a lot of takes on like Silicon Valley and San Francisco and its decline. I think, this was right before he moved out. And so he was thinking about, where to go and culturally where San Francisco was moving. We talked a lot about crypto. It was sort of big it's big now, but it was definitely in a hype cycle.
It was like 2017.
This was 2017. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The ICO craze. Yeah. So and then I don't know. He's brilliant. We a lot of kind of larger society takes or whatever that, like, I wasn't qualified to have any opinion on, a lot of these things, but it was cool and kind of surreal to, have met him.
And then basically he was like, hey, why don't you come work at the family office?
Yeah, pretty much. I think I showed that I had a good eye in certain cases for, bringing in people or opportunities. So I kind of did some part-time stuff for him for a little bit, and then not for pay, just as a friend.
Wow.
And then I think it came to a point where it was obvious that I was, very eager and could add value. And I think at some point he was like, how can we get you full time? And I was like, I would love to come full time. This sounds great. So, yeah.
So that's been now 4 or 5 years that you've been...
5.5 total, 4 years of working full time at the family office, and 1.5 years of managing a P&L for them, but independently.
Yeah, independent fund that you're investing. Of that time, what would you say is your biggest lesson that you've taken away working with and for Peter Thiel?
Yeah, for sure. By the way, I don't know if I fully answered your question. I just went into like a long bio thing. But my biggest takeaway from working with, it's just, you learn this through osmosis and through seeing him operate, but he's just such an independent thinker, and that's such a cliche to say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's when you see it, so many, I think ideas are fashion statements, and so many people don't actually see things for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And especially when it comes to like the personnel involved and like kind of almost like psychoanalyzing them, sizing them up, looking at the incentives and like the team dynamic and being able to evaluate projects. And then also having a very strong kind of conscientiousness compass or like moral compass. Like he really has that. And he's very sensitive to like every little dynamic in looking at and evaluating a project. I think picking that up through osmosis from him, because he would never sort of pedantically tell you what to do.
He's not
as
like,
an investor.
here's the framework, follow this checklist.
Never.
It's intuitive.
But you see it, it's intuitive. And sometimes, early on, sometimes I'd be like, I don't know if he's focused on the right stuff. And then like the thing that he would be focused on would come to roost, whether it was like a cultural issue with the company or...
Fascinating.
Yeah, where it was like, oh, you were like 10 steps ahead.
It's almost like the ability to pattern match. Maybe he's seen so many of those that he knows what those things are going to end up being.
That's a huge part of it. And I think this is probably a poor analogy, but it's a little bit like a machine learning classifier where it's like garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
But if you have big wins, which he has many big wins, then you have some really good pattern matching, because you understand, how, and your priors are never going to be perfect. You're never looking for a 1-to-1 match to like some founding team that worked in the past. And you're always going to have to make exceptions for like outlier idiosyncrasies in any given kind of company instance. But yeah, as far as the pattern matching goes, like I don't know who has more like data, and more data in the positive context too, which is helpful to build off of.
Do you think that independent thinking, which I agree, I mean, I think that's what Peter's famously known for, especially even given his background where he, I believe, like apprenticed or worked under Rene Girard at Stanford, who was like, I guess, the person who popularized the theory of mimetic desire, which, for those watching is essentially that people don't want what they want. They just want what they see other people want. And a lot of our desires just come from copying other people and not actually thinking for ourselves. And you can never truly escape that, no matter how much you become mindful or aware to it.
Yes.
But I think you can start to increase your awareness, which can help you navigate it a bit more carefully. Do you think that you, from observing and through osmosis of working with Peter, have been able to become more of an independent thinker? And what does that practice look like? Because becoming an independent thinker is so important.
Yeah.
But how does one become more of an independent thinker, realizing that we're so just built to be mimetic?
Yeah. So I would say it's ironic, because I was probably, there's mimetic modeling as well, where you need a role model to even incorporate certain behaviors or desires into your life or whatever. And so I think he was that for me. Yeah. And so like the mimesis helped me be less mimetic or something. It's sort of this like,
because
you probably only get somewhere through the mimesis, because it's like, it's actually impossible to be sort of anti-mimetic, which is this sort of trope in Silicon Valley now, which is you correctly stated, a misunderstanding of Girard, because you can't escape mimesis.
Yeah.
And so like, I'm lucky to have him as a mimetic model or something.
Yeah.
And to just see that he would often fade or be skeptical of companies that were super hyped, and then look for sources of knowledge that were very off the beaten path, and nothing, he wasn't too good for anything. He would he would meet with whoever, they could be 19-year-old kid in the garage, or they could be, an uncredentialed kind of amateur scientist, or whatever. As long as he could evaluate, he thinks there's something there, kind of on this is overly used term, but like first principles, he felt sort of a resonance with the idea. He would go for it, and he would really audit his own thinking clearly, and he just wouldn't ping off of other people's opinions. He was just super intellectually honest with himself and in touch with what he was actually thinking. And
enough to have lunch with some random kid who emailed him at Google, right?
No, straight up. Yeah,
I think that's a big indicator of it. I mean, I think that you may not see clearly why Peter saw something in you, but I think I consider you one of the most first principles thinkers I know.
Oh, thanks.
Even in your ability, to have, been able to have this like self-awareness, going through this like very high accolade upbringing and career focus, but then still being able to have the self-reflection of like, wait a second, do these things mean anything? Is this all fugazi?
Right.
And being able to remove yourself from it and ask yourself the questions of like, who am I and what's important and what do I want in life? And there are a lot of people that can get to Google and be like, yeah, great, I did it. I can just like chill here, and it's like early retirement.
Yeah.
But I think it's a special type of individual that's like, okay, well, I have a yearning for more, and look at these interesting people who have been able to have impact. So I actually think you're probably more similar to Peter than you give yourself credit for, but that you've maybe been able to increase that over the course of working with him.
I refuse to accept that, but thank you.
What would you say has been the biggest like lesson through failure of working through with Peter?
Yeah, well, there are definitely a couple of investment failures. One, I could talk about because it's public now, is FTX. Like, so it's like that's like a good example of like something that was just overhyped that, I can say there was no like FOMO, but in retrospect, there clearly was. And like, there's just a lot of momentum, and there were a lot of questions that, in retrospect, I should have pressed on that I sort of forgave because of the momentum and because of the numbers themselves. What people don't understand is like when people are like, oh, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's not. It wasn't a Ponzi. It was a real company. Mm-hmm. And the numbers were real. And, unless like, a lot of the activity, I don't know what percentage of the activity on FTX in retrospect was Alameda. And so that's this big, important question. And then, of course, there are like these self-referential weird dynamics with FTT as well. But like the core exchange, like FTX, like, again, discounting how much of that was Alameda, which clearly there's like some intentional conflation going on their part. And, I think that was, the numbers themselves were real. And so, and there was just a lot of momentum, and it was good macro at the time. And so, and then it was a good lesson for me because I passed on the seed. So it was messing me up mentally. It was like, I'm in a hits-driven business. I missed the biggest hit.
Right.
There are power laws and all of these things.
And you knew Sam, right? Like, or loosely knew of him. From
no, not loosely. Like, well, or pretty well. Like my dad and his dad are friends to this day. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So then you had an insight, like you had an opportunity to invest in the seed.
Yeah.
You passed.
Yeah.
And then obviously FTX at one point or another became like one of the largest crypto company success stories in the world. So you're sitting there kicking yourself in the ass of like, oh fuck, how did I miss this? Like my dad knows this dude's dad.
Yeah.
Like, how did I let this one go?
Yeah.
And then that ended up becoming potentially the biggest blessing for you.
That's exactly right. The biggest blessing. And then, put in a little bit, but like, it was good that it wasn't like losing. And it would have been maybe a small cost basis, but then it would have ballooned up to like be this crazy, lion's share of the kind of assets under management. And that would have been a really scary dynamic, not because, if $1 or $2 million turns into like a few hundred, that's like amazing. But then what that does to you, like Naval Ravikant has this like sort of, it's beginner's luck, but there's beginner's curse. And if you get lucky on like that would have been one of the first investments, then I probably would have recycled all the unrealized dollars or whatever into a bunch of other BS, thinking I was God's gift to humanity or whatever.
You don't want to think that like you have the Midas touch too early.
No, you don't.
You want to feel like it's a challenge.
100%. You want to scale up appropriately. And there are other places I got ahead of my skis, and like I think just macro timing, like in 2021, I was probably too active. It's hard. I mean, like I didn't personally have a frame of macro. Like I didn't know interest rates were going to rise, and I didn't know Russia was going to invade Ukraine, and all these things were going to sort of happen. The equities paradigm would sort of shift.
Yeah.
I mean, on the flip side, it was mostly sort of relatively early stage stuff. So it's like it's not like we were caught like Tiger or D1 or anything like that. Yeah. But there were things I would, in retrospect, obviously do differently.
What have you learned now to look for in founders or in companies? And maybe what are some of those things that don't seem obvious to people?
Yeah.
Maybe even some of those things that you noticed someone like Peter would pay, high attention towards, that you would be like, what the hell? Why does that matter? And then now you're like, oh, wait, I know why.
That's such a good question. I don't know if they're like broad brushed qualities that I've now updated on. I think attention to detail and good strategy, which that sounds obvious, but like the level of questioning I've seen him do live was very helpful. And also, I think for him, it was, it's often like looking to see how people answer the question. And that's just as important as the content of the answer. As an investor, I think you can never be like a complete domain expert in like all the stuff you're investing in. Like
Right.
it's just unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
And so often it's like, how much do I trust this person as a proxy of the information?
Interesting.
And so sometimes you'll like press and ask certain questions where the semantic details might actually be secondary to like the level of detail that the person has and the level of integrity that they're answering it with. And where it's clear they're not spinning things. And it's clear like it's actually sort of a good tell if somebody like knocks themselves in an answer,
Right.
not in a way that's existentially damning
Right.
for the company. But one thing that you don't want to look, you want to kind of be skeptical of, that I think he's good at being skeptical of, is like over salesiness.
Yep.
And I think one time he said one thing to me that really blew my mind, and it was like, there's a fine line between a company with good sales and a company that's oversold. So there's some efficient frontier. You want some salesiness.
Yeah.
You want a good fundraiser.
Yep.
The part of 0 to 1, like distribution's more important than product, actually.
Yeah.
It's just like really contrarian take.
Right. Yeah.
But you don't want a company that is itself
Solely based on-
oversold.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's overhyped and selling at too high a price because the founder's just too hypey. And a lot of those dynamics are especially really important. And in the zero interest rate environment, it was just kind of insanity, like how.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
even like a founder that's able to say like, I don't know, right? Or be able to admit what parts they're knowledgeable on or
Totally.
aren't is, lack of information.
Yeah.
But you want a founder that is able to understand, I don't know this, but I know how to go figure it out.
Yep.
And that's a really good point. And I didn't think about that. Like even that ability to be open-minded, because like you don't want to invest in the founder that's going to be hard-headed, because as an investor, you plan on working with these founders and having a working relationship with them.
Yep. Totally. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And usually if you have a psychic sense around something, it will come to roost. And then it's just, you have to hope it won't come to roost in this sort of existentially damning way. But usually if you sense something and it creates a reservation or hesitancy around the company, it usually will play out in some way.
Okay, I'm going to give you a couple of things. Let's call this company XYZ.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you certain things that are true about this company. You're going to tell me if they're red flags, green flags, or they're just not anything.
Okay, cool. I think it's okay. Let's see if it works. Yeah.
Company XYZ is a solo founder.
Yep.
Is that a green flag or a red flag?
Generically speaking, I don't want to quite say it's like a red flag. I think the efficient frontier optimum is probably 2, but I think a solo
Can
company
still be successful.
Of course.
Do you want to explain why it's often generically implied that a co-founder relationship is more beneficial?
Yes. I think usually you want like some sort of like really strong social rapport where the founders are like super similar in certain ways that like make the social dynamic just like frictionless, and there's like a prehistory. That's like incredibly important. And then you also want them to be opposites, like and complement each other. And those opposites could be in like style. Like one could be like pie in the sky, the other could be incredibly like visionary, the other could be incredibly grounded, or just in pure skill sets. And ideally you want a combo of both. Like I think skill set overlap is not always positive. Like you mostly want, somebody to be a little more technical and product focused, and then the other to be a little more kind of distribution, fundraising, business focused. And that's like the conventional split. But I think there are other splits that work. But that's hard to find, I think, in one person. And that tension actually creates a healthy tension of like, we need the product ready by a certain time or whatever, and we need to get it out in the customer's hands. Then you have this other like kind of perfectionistic, like behind closed doors, Yeah. And I think that's actually like a good tension. And if you're one person, you can totally like be like a Swiss Army knife, or you can have like a chief product guy or a business guy who can like help. But often the incentives get messed up if like you have the lion's share of equity, and then that other person is doing just as important of a role, generically speaking, but they're, they have 5% equity or whatever, and it's like performance based, and they like came in late, and it's like not their baby. Like you don't want that. So.
No, that's good. What about a company? You can assume that this is maybe slightly later stage.
Yeah.
A company that's no remote at all. Everybody is in an office in a physical city in space.
Late stage?
Later stage.
Later stage? I love that. I mean, I think that's pretty good.
That's green flag?
The green flag for me. Yeah, I'm pro in office work. I think if somebody is truly kind of more of a hired gun and they're really skilled in some idiosyncratic way and like they just don't need to be in the office to like contribute or whatever.
Yeah.
As the founder, you shouldn't sacrifice that hire just because they can't come into the office.
Right.
But generally speaking, I think you want in person, especially early. I think later things matter less. The structural factors matter more. You can do, it's more about business planning, financial optimization, stuff like that. Early on, you're like, it's like the movie 300, and like it's like you're outnumbered. You need like that, like
that bond,
that bond, and like the we're in camping together. We're in the trenches, and there aren't too many counterexamples in my opinion. I think that, and I'm curious to see how a lot of these counterexamples to what I'm saying play out. Post COVID, where like remote is now the de facto kind of standard. I'm skeptical of a lot of it.
I agree. I mean, I think even with Creator Now, we were so gung-ho on having everybody in person in an office, or at least having two bases where we had product and engineering in Toronto, and we had like marketing and sales and kind of other stuff here, experiences, community. And that felt like it worked really, really well. Because like those two parts of the company felt like they didn't need to have a ton of overlap with one another. They can kind of do their own things. And sometimes I often find, this happened all the time at Shopify when I worked there, is the engineers would get bothered by all the people in marketing and sales because they don't want to have people like loud and running around with ideas all over the place. Like they want to get shit done.
Yeah. And you're back and forth between those places too.
And I get back and forth between those places. So I was able to kind of toe both lines. And I agree. I think there's like, it's second to none what could be done in person.
Yeah.
I think we have certain realities of like flexibility that needs to be maintained in today's world. But I think remote only companies do miss out on a lot unless they're able to supplement with like really frequent offsites and moments of like collaboration.
Totally.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's cool to hear in your case. And I agree. I think you can do 2, maybe 3 locations that are kind of like, they have their own kind of cultures or whatever, and you can manage those. But
what would you say about .ai domain?
I think it's people trying to get their valuations up generally. I'm kind of skeptical, I think it's we're definitely in some sort of hype cycle, and I never really jumped on it. Maybe I'll lose out on some opportunities as a result, but like I never felt that motivated to like invest in AI over the last year and a half. I mean, clearly the stuff OpenAI is doing is like really, really cool. I would argue it's more taking NLP from like 97% effective to like 99 or 100% effective, which begets all sorts of like cool new unlocks and innovation, but like isn't necessarily this like crazy stepwise leap a la all the AGI talk that we're sort of hearing. So I'm mostly cynical about .ai.
Wait,
domains.
so elaborate on that a little bit. Like, what are as an investor, I guess you've taken a kind of like a back seat to see what will happen in this new hype cycle.
Yeah.
But what are your general thoughts around how AI will kind of play out, or the real implications of what it will have on our, like, call it even GDP as like a nation?
Sure. I'm probably not the best person to prognosticate on this, so I'll caveat that with that. But I think that clearly there'll be all sorts of implications in terms of white collar work, legal, accounting. Loops that you run in the digital world will get easier and easier to automate via this stuff. There, data labeling, like things like that should get taken out by large language models. So that seems somewhat easy to predict. I think the like robotics stuff, there's still all these like crazy issues and problems with it in terms of getting robots to do like simple tasks. Like sometimes they can do harder tasks, like, it's actually harder. It's easier for them to do harder tasks than it is to do simple tasks.
Yeah.
Like basic kinesthetics seems like this big sort of challenge. And then just multi-domain kind of inference and knowledge, I think feels like really, really hard. So like true semantic understanding, I just don't think we're there yet. Like there are these sort of Winograd schemas where you can break, LLMs. So it's like, I put the brick on the table, it broke. Like, what is it referring to? Is it the brick or the table? Like, you and I know it's the table because we have the context. Like LLMs still mess stuff like that up like all the time. So I think they're like, a lot of this stuff is sort of statistics on steroids. And I think the way it's discussed is, sentient, conscious AI. And I think it's really important to parse like what is actually happening here. Now, on the flip side of that, like to be able to describe an app in natural language and create that application, like whether it's a web app or a native app, that's wild. It's really crazy. And the ability to interface with knowledge and like, ask questions and learn certain things. Or like, I think if I'm open, this is what I would do if I were OpenAI, and I have no insight into like anything they're doing. But like, what I would do is I would like be more cynical about, the strategy would be like, this is game theory vis-a-vis China. It's very like dangerous what we're doing, and we don't know, how it's going to work out, but like we're pretty conscientious, so we should be in charge, whatever. And, we're going to figure out, new physics, which, personally I'm skeptical of the ability to do that. But like, if I were like a cynical strategist for them, I would say all those things. And then really I would just try to like beat Google or whatever. And what I would do is I would try to like, have you heard of like, do you remember like if this, then that?
Yeah.
It's like running a bunch of like tasks online. Like be like the best like personal web assistant for like everybody online. Like be the natural language interface between somebody and like all their like online tasks, like do their taxes for that. Like all of that should get taken out by OpenAI. That is a very valuable company if they can do that.
I mean, I think that's probably what they're doing.
I think so too, but I think maybe I'm being too like, maybe the strategy that I just said is what they're doing. Who knows? I don't know.
I mean, I think it's probably the most probable. I think that's also why Google, probably of most companies, feels the most threatened by the recent advancements and the tools that have come out of OpenAI, because it's like, oh shit, search engine optimize, like SEO stuff is like not being used as much. They're coming right for the jugular,
right. Well, that's why strategically on the PR front, I wouldn't go right for the jugular. I would say, would you build, physics and material science,
and then
just do it
in a more sneaky way.
Yeah. But I mean, who knows what they're doing, what the strategy is. But
do you think AGI is real, or do you think we're being sold some fairy dust about like the fact that this might even be possible to create some sort of like sentient technological voice or mind?
I'm open to AGI being real in the distant future, but I don't think we have the current right framework. We don't understand how consciousness works. And you can have like an effective intelligence definition, like the Turing test, which is like you have like two rooms, like you have like an observer on the outside, and then you have two rooms, right? And you have like an AI in one room, and then you have a human in the other room. You like can't tell them apart, which is where we're at with chatbots right now. Like pretty much,
pretty close.
Unless you know how to break them via these like Winograd schema sort of type tricks, it's really hard to like tell the difference. Yeah. So I think we're there on that front. But to me, that's an effective definition. And you get into these really crazy philosophical questions where you, Zach, can't definitively say that I'm not, quote unquote, a P zombie, like that I'm not like literally a computer myself. And I can't definitively, you get into these hard problems of consciousness that like these philosophers like David Chalmers sort of talk about.
Like, what is consciousness?
What is consciousness? Will AI be able to take out a lot of basic sort of functional tasks that humans are currently doing? Like, absolutely. Sure. And then I think there are more interesting routes to artificial general intelligence than the current sort of more data, more compute, that sort of strategy. And where I think I would look, and this is where I want to look, is biological AGI. So like training neurons or biological cells to do certain tasks. And then I'd look at and then I'd study consciousness, and I'd try to figure out how the brain works. Like maybe the brain is like a hybrid quantum classical computer, which is something I sort of sometimes hypothesize because of certain abilities, like intuition. Like what is that? That's learning at low data. It's like low sample size learning. Like you come out as a baby and you sort of like, you have this primordial understanding that like snakes are dangerous, and you Noam Chomsky talks about like you know certain words like coming out like a Chomskyan pre-grammar. What is that? To me, that is actually possibly pointing towards the brain being a quantum computer, because a lot of people building quantum computers hypothesize that maybe they can send information back in time. Like there's temporal non-locality in quantum systems, and you can reverse qubit positions in quantum computations. And, you can even do a double slit experiment in the present and one in the future. And the future one seems like it's affecting the past. And so it's been hypothesized that you can send semantic content back in time on the application layer of a working quantum computer. Right now, we don't have quantum computers because of bottlenecks around the hardware, keeping it stable via, really cold. It's so energy intensive. You have to keep it really cold and to maintain coherence on the chip level. But if we do that, then I think you might be able to see that sort of effect. And that's I think how the brain works via intuition. Have you ever made a decision in your life that feels totally irrational incrementally? Like with the data you have, it makes no sense, but it makes sense in the context of an endpoint that happens later.
For sure.
So, and a lot of people would say the same. Like, I just felt like I needed to go to take this trip or go to this place.
Quit this job.
To me, that is your future knowledge state sending information back in time that you have to, and there's no other explanation because the rational data set you have in the present wouldn't ever lead you to make that decision. And there's a Stanford professor named Gary Nolan, and he's studying a part of the brain called the caudate nucleus in the putamen, and he'll put an fMRI there, which studies blood flow or tracks blood flow, and somebody will be playing a game of Go. And they'll make a counterintuitive or brilliant move in the game of Go, which is a move that doesn't, again, make any sense on a go-forward basis. It only makes sense in the context of them ultimately winning.
Yeah.
And that part of the brain lights up. And so maybe that's like maybe there are other quantum parts of the brain. Roger Penrose, this physicist, thought that there are, microtubules in the brain that, might be sort of the quantum sensors or whatever. But that's and more and more is happening in this world of quantum biology, where you think of the body as warm, wet, and noisy, so not able to maintain quantum coherence like these sort of the chips. Yeah, exactly. And so, but we're finding out creation of enzymes and bird navigation in certain cases. Like in a bunch of cases, the body does actually make use of quantum effects, or in a few cases, it makes use of quantum effects. And so I think we might find more and more like that. And that would be my intuition as to where a lot of these AGI people are off, is that like the digital stuff is not this perfect analog to the biology.
Interesting. So you think that there potentially is a lot of, or high likelihood of a bridge towards like, call it hardware or artificial neurons and like things that actually exist tangibly in the world as well, that are controlled by some sort of computer or technology that's not, as we understand, human?
What do you mean? Like a biological,
like artificial neurons?
Yeah,
right? When you get into artificial neurons, you get into pretty much artificial beings. Potentially.
Yeah. I do, and I don't know where I stand ethically on trying to recreate humans per se.
Yeah,
but I do think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in that world. There's a lab at Tufts, and there's a professor named Michael Levin, and he's doing really crazy, trippy work around basically like voltage gated ion channels. So like the distribution of ions, like, sodium, potassium, like inside and outside cells, and how that dictates actually what morphology ends up growing. So like what limb you end up growing. So the classic example is you take a tadpole, you sever the arm of the tadpole, you take the electrical charge of the cells of the head cells of the tadpole, and you apply that to that stub arm, and you can grow a two-headed tadpole.
Interesting.
And he has like a limb regeneration company around this sort of tech. And he's building these xenobots, which are these sort of like von Neumann replicating machine. It's like basically like a kind of another type of intelligent, very basic intelligent, but intelligent being from like a stem cell, from like a primordial cell. And so I think in the future you're going to have like an anatomical 3D printer, an anatomical compiler.
What does anatomical mean?
Body based, like biology based.
Biology based.
Yes, and programmable biology. Like I do believe that in the future. And then there are all these ways in which, like this guy Pedro Domingos wrote this book, The Master Algorithm, and it's like, how do we get to AGI? And it's like all these possible routes. And the one route, he's like, it's so hard to recreate biology just because you have thousands and thousands of years of evolution, millions of years of evolution, if you take prokaryotes into, account. And so I do think there's something very powerful about biology and the body that is not well understood. And that a lot of the kind of, there's hubris involved in a lot of the, the tech world that they take it for granted. And they take it for granted, and then they immediately go to transhumanism and the fact that we need to like implant ourselves.
Yeah.
When I actually think that there are a lot of latent abilities of literally just biology that, like, if we lived in a more natural, better way, and this is getting a little woo-woo, I think our bodies would be way more like technologically capable themselves.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That basically we're shortcutting what our bodies are capable of doing by living in suboptimal ways, potentially eating suboptimal food.
Totally.
Giving our bodies stress that maybe they don't need. And that's actually what potentially is causing us to live at, like, not being able to use our full brains.
Yes.
Fascinating. And so, like, you're saying a lot of people think we're going to end up becoming these cyborgs where we end up implanting these chips and these devices within us.
Yep.
But that potentially the real solution is that we just actually need to be more human. What's interesting here
that's my take, yeah.
Is that the thing that I agree with is I think we often look at the human body and who we are, and then we go like, we feel like we figured it out.
Yeah.
But like we have not even come close.
Yeah.
And then we build all this tech that's external to us, and we're like, woo, we're so smart. It's so impressive. Look what these computers can do, and look at the internet, and look at Wi-Fi, and look at AI. But we still don't even understand this. Yes. We don't understand the bigger things around like consciousness and our brains and how to use it and what everything means and why it works the way it does.
Fully agree.
And so we're like spending all this time being like, that's the thing.
Yeah.
We're in a simulation, which could be true, but we still haven't even answered the own questions of ourselves. And rather than looking at our own bodies and what we're wired to do and what we're capable of, it almost feels like we completely have put the smartest minds on thinking outside of ourselves.
Totally. And it's funny to me, like Nick like a lot of this came from this like book, Super Intelligence, Nick Bostrom.
Okay.
Or whatever. And like the Elon sort of like, joined that as well, where it's like the AI is going to take over inevitably. And so if you can't beat him, join him.
Sure.
So it's like put the AI in you, and then that's the only way we can survive. To me, that's so dangerous. You end up dying with a whimper and not a bang, because it's like what is AI really being used for right now? It's just the consumer internet.
Sure. And
having a lower latency, higher bandwidth relationship with that is actually really bad for your like TikTok is like a way to do that. The meta stuff, like if we are, it's funny because the whole Bostrom thing is we're in a simulation. Why would you go into a bit compressed 2D simulation in the form of the digital world, or put a chip that is trying to help you interface with that? If you think we're in this like crazy simulation, what if we could break out of the simulation? Like if we're in some sort of Plato's cave simulation, that can be demoralizing and talked about in this sort of postmodern nihilistic sense of like, okay, you can play Grand Theft Auto if you're in the simulation. Like,
I was about to say.
Horrible. Or it's like, no, like you can ascend out of the thing, and like maybe the currency in that system is like virtue and love and like all these important things that like our material world is just skewed and like set up to kind of ignore. And anyway, the point is that his whole thing is like we're in a simulation, so if you can't beat him, join him, like, and or maybe that's the way Elon at least interpreted it, so we have to like have a higher bandwidth relationship with this like bit compressed thing. Whatever this simulation is like fascinating and interesting.
Yeah.
And it's robust. It's happening in Hilbert's space at the quantum level or whatever.
Yeah.
And so like if you're gonna explore something, explore that like one. Break out. Don't go into like the smaller babushka doll like simulation,
we're spending less and less time in the simulation that matters.
Yeah.
And more time like living in a world that we've created.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting? It's almost like humans have been born into this thing.
Yes.
And we're like, oh man, but then we've like now created digital identities, digital lives, digital money.
Yes.
We work online, we are entertained online, we meet our friends, sometimes our partners online.
Yeah.
And so it does make sense that if you fast forward hundreds of years, we're spending more and more time in this separate reality that we've created that's completely human made.
Yes.
And arguably, we've done that because we're not ready to come to terms with the reality that we've been born into.
Yes.
And we feel a lot more comfortable when the constraints are man-made and we get them and we understand how they work. But that is quite scary because it almost feels like we're taking 10 steps forward, but 100 steps back.
Yeah.
And actually figuring out what the hell are we doing here?
What are we doing here? Who am I? Who are we? What are we doing? Like, all of that is way more interesting to me than like, how do we like have some sort of like higher computational interface or whatever?
Yeah.
Well, like that feels like a perversion of those questions.
Is this what initially got you interested in aliens? So I guess like, Jesse, you have a YouTube channel. We'll link it. Everybody's got to go watch Jesse. You probably all already have. But one of the reoccurring themes is nature of reality, UFOs, aliens.
Totally.
And, the reason I'm such a passionate viewer of your videos around those topics are because I really think that some of this is a little bit more about understanding our own consciousness, which I think is arguably the highest priority of the world.
Totally.
Is to understand, what are we doing here? Why were we put here? What is all this for? That curiosity within us I think has always been there, and people have, pondered this forever. We don't need to be the civilization that figures it out.
Yeah.
But it almost feels like this is like a game where every generation gets slightly closer. We learn a little bit more.
Right.
We advance a little bit further. And UFOs seem to be like this gate-kept knowledge that potentially can get us infinitely closer towards understanding consciousness. Is that part of what got you interested in it? And if not, what was?
Yeah, definitely. I think if we are in Plato's cave, I think these are objects that...
For those that don't know, Plato's cave is you're in a cave, but you don't know you're in a cave because you've only ever been in the cave.
Exactly. And they're guardians, and you're seeing shadow play. You're seeing simulacra or like lower kind of substitutes for some higher Platonic realms. You're not seeing the primordial thing going on. You're seeing like some substitute in the physical world. And I think if we are in Plato's cave, I think there's something about the UFO is more primordial. It's from some spirit world, or it's from some like less bit compressed, expanded thing. And it's recursively unsolvable. You see it and it jams your brain because you're like, that can't exist. That doesn't make any sense. It defies all of our laws of physics, and it's always it's highly strange. It's highly absurd. Usually in a way that it almost seems like is intentional to be highly absurd. Like it's messing with you.
Yep.
And that, I think, leads you out of the cave if you let it, if you follow it. And so, I think that an interest in consciousness and this mid-century, not even mid-century, I guess it was invented in the 19th century field called parapsychology that William James and a few others were early proponents of, which is this idea that we don't live in a kind of a dualist universe where like, this is your mind, this is matter. There's no interaction between those things. Like I think there is an interaction. And so that sort of led me into the UFO thing too, because I think parapsychology has an implication for...
Meaning that these are not two separate things. My awareness or my consciousness knowing that there's a chair here makes a chair here.
Yes.
But the fact that maybe the chair is only here given the way that my consciousness interprets matter is what makes it there. But that is maybe something that we should question as concrete reality.
Yes. There are all these like mid-century experiments that show, in my opinion, pretty verifiably weak effects between mind and matter.
Interesting.
Where you can take like super rudimentary computers and actually affect the output via your mind, which is really this crazy, like if you think about the implications, it's nuts.
Right.
It's hard to scale those effects. It's hard to instrumentalize them into like workable tech.
Yep.
But to me, that points towards some greater ontological understanding of reality that doesn't involve this sort of clear dualist separation. And then as far as, what you were getting at with like the chair and like, I don't have a clear positive worldview where clearly there's something objective about this chair that is outside of the ability for my mind to manipulate. And then clearly there's something about my mind's preconception of a chair that's defining how I interact with it and see it and feel it and whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't have like a clear view on what that is. I mean, one thing that I've toyed with is like, we're all nodes of consciousness, and people can ascend it into higher, more powerful consciousness states. and they just become a greater weight as a node. And so Jesus or Muhammad or Moses or whatever, you get to a certain level and you can perform miracles or whatever, and you can like change this chair into something else or whatever.
Interesting.
But I think that is rare, and even rarer in the modern world, especially because I think the epistemological soup that we live in, the accepted de facto understanding of reality that we have, involves dualism and that a priori skepticism. So I think whatever counterweight one person might have, where it's like, I'm this magical being, and maybe you do have people who have more ascended consciousness, I think it's very hard to perform sort of more magical things.
Almost like makes me think about like those people that walk over like hot coals.
Yeah.
Or you know, put those, like, lay on those beds of spikes.
Totally.
And like do those sorts of things.
Like David Blaine. Like,
David Blaine,
like, how does he
stuff.
Yeah, and David Blaine's a trippy guy. Like, I spent some time with him once, and we were talking about, he was like, I think that we'll be able to speak to animals telepathically. And my friend worked at Princeton Parapsychology Lab doing a lot of these experiments. David Blaine visited. So he's interested in the application to a lot of what he does to science. And clearly he has some other gear that he can get into, you know, in terms of his mind. And yeah, maybe he even employs some of these mind over matter. I have no idea. But,
it's fascinating though.
Yeah.
And so what was this, what was your first entry into
parapsychology or
no,
UFOs?
into UFOs? Was it through parapsychology?
Well, I think I had a predisposition into believing in like weird shit because of parapsychology and because my godfather is this trippy psychiatrist out here named Phil Stutz, who Jonah Hill made a documentary on. And like the documentary's great, but it's like a very basic like showing of who he is. Like he like will channel this like 19th century philosopher named Rudolf Steiner, and like he's just a weird dude.
Interesting.
Yeah, and like I grew up like around like weird ideas, and so like that gave me like a kind of epistemic openness to like all sorts of things. And then the UFO thing, you know, part of the job for Peter was investing, kind of, you know, cut and dry, and then the other half of the job was like exploring like interesting out there ideas. And when you do that, I think you inevitably come across UFOs, because it's like, it's this thing that, again, it like jams up everybody's like conventional understandings of physics, of the world, of, you know, of aerospace, you know, and of psychology. And I thought it was a joke, honestly. Initially, I was like, I didn't take it seriously. I was like, well, I have to look into UFOs, you know, like it's just another thing that, you know, I should debunk it, you know. And this is a common story among serious people who like, they'll go in being like, I'm going to debunk this in like a month or 2 months. And like, and then you get into it and you go deeper and you go deeper and you go deeper. And you're like, oh my God, like the world is not what I thought it was. And for me, that was like meeting two guys. One is this guy named Hal Puthoff, who's a laser physicist, who then went on to work for the CIA and started the CIA's psychic spy program.
Wow. And
then this other guy, Gary Nolan, who's the Stanford professor I mentioned, who claims to have UFO crash parts in his lab at Stanford. But he's a tenured professor. He's he's been nominated for a Nobel Prize multiple times. He's spun out 9-figure companies. He's like a real guy. Yeah. And speaking to both of them, these sort of, you know, the intersection between like credentials, like rigorous thought process, like clearly very smart, and like, you know, real history, and then like total belief in UFOs and a lot of evidence. Mm-hmm. And after a few conversations like that, I was hooked, and you can't look away once you think there's any sort of reality there. At least for me, some people, you tell them that you're like, there are UFOs exist, they're like, oh, cool, and then they like move on, and that's cool. But like, and it's interesting for me to see that, and I don't disrespect. There are people who are like, this is the most important thing. How can you? If it doesn't resonate with you, don't look into it. And I think there are dangers to looking into it, and it can get weird. So I don't recommend it. But for me, I'm an insatiably curious person, and I
understand it. I think a lot of people are like, you know, even when your buddy Dave Grush like did his thing and came out and was a whistleblower and said all the stuff that he's seen and heard and whatnot, that was like breaking news for like 2 days, and then the world moved on, and it was like, yeah, people are like, yeah, aliens exist, and they're like, yeah, but I got fucking bills to pay. Like,
yeah, we're in the totally, which I understand, by the way.
Or people are just like, it doesn't fucking matter, like whatever.
What does it matter to my life?
When it matters for me, it'll matter, you know.
I I respect that and I fully understand it, and I wouldn't even argue against it. And so I think in certain cases that's true. Like these other things are just more salient. And it's a luxury, and it's a total luxury to like care about this stuff. And go for it.
But important nonetheless.
I think so.
I think so too.
I think to not have some subset of society caring about like what is this that we're living in,
that should arguably be what we put some of the smartest minds to.
Yeah, you're gonna end up with a stagnant society if you.
Do you remember the piece of evidence that was presented to you that made it hard for you to look away?
It's a great question. Yeah, just honestly, like going deep with Gary Nolan and him being like, I have parts in my office that I saw. I've seen these parts.
Where did you get them from?
From this guy, Jacques Vallée, who's this also pretty serious guy. He was on one of the first inventors of the internet, like worked on this ARPA project with Doug Engelbart.
Part of the government.
Part of the government, exactly, out of the Department of Energy. And was an astronomer before that, is also a venture capitalist. So like this rigorous, smart guy. He's become almost like the de facto go-to outside of the government. If you see a crash and you find parts, you send him to Jacques.
Interesting.
So he's like the guy, like his mailing address is like online and shit. So it's funny. So he
should do an unboxing channel.
Yeah, we have this is a metallic orb. Yeah. So he has a lot of material.
Yeah.
And
so he sent some of it to Gary Nolan.
So he's like, I need somebody to do serious material science on this. Like that, he wasn't equipped to do that, but Gary Nolan can do like mass spectrometry on it and like go deeper on like what's actually going on. Yeah. Look at the isotope ratios and stuff. And Gary found isotope ratios for materials that don't naturally exist on Earth. And so like at that point, I'm talking to him and he's saying this and he's like, he's not a liar. And those are the mass spec results. And I'm just like, what's going on here? I mean, there's stuff like that. And meeting Grush too, where it's like, this guy's like a hardcore Intel dude, like read into like a bunch of special access programs and like dealing with the presidential daily briefing. Like he's not a joke. And he's bringing 40 people directly to the inspector general they've worked with the material firsthand. And the inspector general is saying this complaint is urgent and credible. Like if it's a psyop, it's the worst psyop in the world. First of all, I've gotten to know him and I really trust him and just like him and like, so that's my main filter in terms of it not being a psyop. But if it is a psyop, it's the worst psyop in the world because it's so near-term falsifiable. Like if nothing...
psyop meaning defined as the government trying to get us to think something that's
not true. Yeah. It's just like, that's not what this is. Yeah. Because like...
You mean in the sense that the government is putting these things out to make us think that aliens are real. Is that like what the theory is?
Some people...
Or is the psyop that aliens are real, but to throw us off their trail, because they know what the hell is going on, they like put out these random things that make everyone just kind of study arbitrary bullshit?
That's interesting. I mean, I think skeptics would theorize that both of those things
because
on.
There's other things like it could be China, it could be Russia.
Sure.
There's stuff like that.
Totally.
I believe that there's like a lot of people that believe the studying of string theory is like complete bullshit.
I mean, I think that, yeah. I mean, not in necessarily some coordinated psyop way, but just clearly in terms of like the innovation that it's begotten.
Yeah. Like it hasn't been effective.
It hasn't been, totally. But yeah, I mean, there are skeptics out there for sure. The thing I wouldn't call it to be skeptical about. It's just to be aware of, because the government's being sort of transparent about this, is like, I think this is a fight in the government between people who want mostly like 99% disclosure and people who don't want disclosure. I don't think anybody wants full 100% disclosure. So the point is you're dealing with people with, that might lead to like building weapons that are like, and so stuff like that. You're not going to get like patriotic intel dudes whistleblowing to like get destructive tech out there. So if anybody thinks that, like, you're wrong, but like they would be open about that. That's what they say. It's like what Gresh said in my documentary is like nuclear physics widely studied their programs. Nuclear programs are proprietary. Like there are trade secrets within American nuclear programs, of course, that are classified. And so there has to be some midpoint between sending our best and brightest STEM students into the wrong frameworks like string theory, like sheep to slaughter. Yep. There has to be some, midpoint between that and let's give everybody the hydrogen bomb or whatever, which I don't know if this even leads to that, but,
but it could. Maybe.
There's probably some way to weaponize some of this stuff.
So basically the real ask is, not just to make people aware that, hey, aliens might exist or UFOs are real or some version of a UFO is real, but actually to say more people need to care about this, because the more that people care and demand that clearances open up, the smarter the minds can go into these fields and study some of the things that we found. And we don't need full clearance where all of this becomes public knowledge and good, because that can be used by the wrong people. But more people being able to work on this can get us further along. And arguably, the government potentially is hitting roadblocks and trying to then go after other smart people and doing that regardless, right? Like some of this might actually be happening, and some of the clearances might actually be opening up as we speak, because maybe they are hitting dead ends on being able to reverse engineer or figure some of this stuff out.
That would be my theory. And even Grush said this in our documentary. He was like, I was like, why did they speak to you? And he was like, they seem frustrated. These programs are over compartmentalized. It's a lot of kind of older, stodgier talent. Like the kind of usual suspects as far as the names of aerospace corporations that come up as having craft or whatever aren't attracting like some of the best talent, brightest young talent, like SpaceX is, Anduril, like these other companies. So I think if you're thinking about this even from a national security perspective, which I come at it more from like a nature of reality, what's going on. But if you think about it from a national security perspective, just in terms of game theory vis-a-vis other countries that might have their own program, if you don't have your best, we're entering an unstable time. Yeah. If you don't have your best and brightest working on this stuff, you got to like rejigger, how these things are compartmentalized. You have to broaden awareness around it and have people understand that it's even real, so they're not pushed into the wrong sort of framework.
If you, Jesse, could take your YouTube channel and show and have full clearance behind either a department in the government or a private company or international country, but you could only have one of those. So like you have like full clearance and access to everything inside of like Lockheed, or have a particular department within the government that you get full clearance and access to, or like you get full access to all of China's clearance. And that would be the door that you open that you get fly. Which one do you feel has the most behind it?
Department of Energy.
Department of Energy.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. I just think that, I think the UFO thing's very tied in with them. And with
energy.
And with atomic secrets, which are governed by the Department of Energy.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Given the fact that a lot of these UFO sightings and interactions have happened around nuclear.
Consistently seem to happen around nuclear. Yeah. Which is a very interesting fact.
Yes. Where there's like some sort of message trying to be communicated to us about our developments of nuclear by some sort of other being. I
think so. Probably. I think either a message trying to be communicated to us. There are a million theories. There's like the benevolent protector theory. They don't want us to blow ourselves up.
Yeah.
There's the more strategic or cynical, like they're mining us for resources. They're protecting their U.S. is like the America, not America. The world is like a gas station or something.
Yeah,
like if you had some nuclear spill at the gas station, you got to like make sure, it's just like that. There's the theory that maybe they are tracking the axis along which we are making progress towards our ability to break space-time, because the energy output, we're at like 10 to the 6th energy output, I think was like the Tsar bomb or whatever. And at some, people have thrown around different numbers, 10 to the 9th, I think 10 to the 19th is like Planck scale energy. At some order of magnitude higher than 10 to the 6th, you break space-time and you rip holes in space-time. And so is that a capability to like mess with their flight path? Is that our capability to be able to fly like they can fly? Are they tracking both? I don't know, but
these are the interesting
theories.
Things.
Yeah.
You had a video on your channel recently that I really liked, where one of the theories is that aliens might not be from another planet or universe, galaxies away, but potentially are humans or a version of a human from different points in time.
Yeah.
And I found that to be one of the more interesting theories, maybe even just to speculate around myself. But do you want to explain what that theory,
yeah, sure,
where that comes from and what,
Sure. And I will say, I think it's a false dichotomy, other planets and time travel, because I think the only way to get to other really habitable planets, I think Mars is kind of a fool's errand. That is where I would disagree with Elon.
Yeah.
You want to get to like exoplanets that are like Earth-like, which really would support our sort of carbon-based form of life. I think you need to figure out time travel. You need to figure out a way to engineer space-time.
Okay, because, one of the interesting things, honestly, I've learned a lot of this from just like, and I feel like I'm the layman's understanding of it.
No, you know
is that space and time are, I don't think as different as we think.
Yeah, I think
like,
if you mess with one coordinate, you mess with the other.
Yeah, like I think we live on this ball in this galaxy and in this solar system, and we think that when we're going out to Mars or like even galaxies away, that it's just like, you're just traveling through space, like when you drive kilometers or miles down the street.
Yeah.
But I think and then we think of time as like, oh, well, just seconds pass, and then that time is linear. But I think, and again, this is just speculation, but from the things that I've started to learn through watching your content, it almost feels like space and time are related. Obviously, you can break space-time, theoretically.
Yeah.
And so that seems to me to be one of the more interesting speculations around what happens here is, wait a second, we don't understand physics.
Yes.
Like our understanding of physics is so preliminary that I think hopefully the great discovery of our time and our generation will be in physics and will be something about our understanding of how space and time work in collaboration with one another.
That'd be awesome. Totally. And I think, yes, if you think about our current physics frameworks, if you can't travel faster than the speed of light, not only you can't travel faster than the speed of light, forget our physics frameworks. Right. Just take our current travel capabilities. So right now with chemical propulsion, like rocket propulsion, you can travel, I think like 0.1% the speed of light.
Okay.
And the closest star is Proxima Centauri. It's just 4 light years away.
Okay.
So it's like it's going to take a long time to get there, longer than a lifetime.
Yeah.
Then I think with nuclear propulsion, you get maybe 30 to 50% better than that or whatever. And that's what everybody's talking about. Nuclear propulsion takes you longer distances, but still it just doesn't work within our lifetime. And then you think about, so that's just like our engineering. Then you think about our physics. So like in relativity, you have something called the twin paradox, which is the faster you go to the speed of light, towards the speed of light, the slower you age.
Right.
And the slower time moves. So like if we were twins and I went off Earth, I would age slower than you. I would then go to another planet. It would take me forever because of our chemical combustion or whatever. I'd come back and it would be Planet of the Apes. Like there'd be nothing here. It'd be a wasteland. And I would all have aged slower, maybe even if I go faster or whatever, even then I'll still age slow. Like, even if I can go faster than chemical combustion and nuclear propulsion, you still have this twin paradox problem or whatever, where it's like you can't even bring anything back that's useful.
Because things will have gone too far here.
Because things will have moved too fast here. And aged too quickly. And so I think our frameworks are not right. And so I think it's a false dichotomy, and you need to figure out time travel in order to figure out effective space travel.
Can you explain to me, like on 5, why that works? Why is it that when you're in that rocket, you age slow?
I don't know. I guess the time is dependent on the velocity of the observer in general relativity.
Yeah.
So the faster you are moving, the slower time is moving, because time is actually a relative metric in relativity. If that makes sense.
And so this is Einstein's.
There's like a reference frame. This is Einstein stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then there's a question of how compatible that is with the quantum stuff. But
fascinating.
Yeah. And I would say it's a bad framework, and I think the quantum stuff is actually more ontologically true. And there was a debate mid-century around whether the ontological truth of the quantum stuff even matters, or whether it's just mathematical useful formalisms. And I actually think it's very ontologically interesting. But yeah, that's the Einstein take, is that it's important for like making calculations or whatever. It's like there's like an observer dependent effect. Like if I'm standing outside of a building and I'm watching like a limo go by and I'm seeing there's like a laser in the middle and the laser's shooting out at two mirrors.
Mm-hmm.
If it's going like left to right, like there's like it's happening simultaneously if the car is your reference frame, because they're the two mirrors are the same distance from the laser shooter.
Right.
But for me, it's going to take a little bit longer to get to the mirror that it's moving away from, the car is moving away from, because I'm in a different reference frame. Mm-hmm. So that's like the best thought experiment I can give you to kind of describe it. Like, and they call that, this is from a book by a guy named Clifford Pickover, who's like this mad IBM scientist. And he calls that the simultaneity of relativity, which is, I think it's this beautiful, fun thought experiment, because something is happening simultaneously if the car is your reference frame. If you're inside the car, it's happening at the exact same time because the lasers are shooting at the exact same speed. But if I'm standing like in front of the building and I'm just watching it,
then it's not.
That's a different. So it's everything is relative. Yeah.
Everything is relative.
Yeah.
Fascinating. What is the most interesting thing to you these days in the world of UFOs? Because you're studying, you're learning. You just did, a great documentary with David Grush, which, you got incredible access with our good friend Amar.
Yeah.
From Yes Theory.
Yeah.
What's next? Where does it go from here?
I don't know, man. I'm kind of, there are all these loose threads that I'm interested in pulling on. So there's this mid-century inventor who I think might have been one of the first people to like start reverse engineering this stuff, UFOs, and his name is Townsend Brown. And so
I've heard you bring that name up before.
Yeah. I mean, I've now become kind of obsessed with him, like amateur historian of this guy. And I interviewed his biographer, and then his biographer, actually a friend of his daughter's, who's also friends with his biographer, is coming over Wednesday, and she's this like really cute old woman. She's like in her 80s or something, knows everything about this guy. And so I think that'll be like this really fun interview. But he, to me, he's like the Dos Equis guy. He's like the most interesting. He pops up in every like important mid-century event in the US, and he's clearly at the frontier of really interesting science and tech. And he's just like larger than life figure. So I want to get to the bottom of, his involvement here. But I don't know. I'm seeing maybe 2 or 3 shows around the corner. There's a show I'm going to do on the moon and how it's might play a part in this and how it's a very anomalous object. But I'm seeing maybe 2 or 3 shows around the corner and just pouring everything I can, as long as I'm high conviction and the next thing, just pouring a lot of resources into that and making sure that's good, and then just trying to keep my head down and keep going. And I think it'll be hopefully a good year, growth wise for the channel if I do that.
One video at a time, one thread at a time.
One video at a time, yeah.
Do you have a goal for how many videos you want to try to put out in 2024?
No. And I've given up on that because I'm too perfectionistic and erratic. Like a combination of like, I'm not the best at like, managing time or like, the core like routine style discipline or whatever. I work in spurts. Yeah. I've just learned to accept that about myself. And then I'm just so perfectionistic once I get into something that I can't be like, I'm going to put it out by this time. Like if it's not ready, I just can't do it. It's like sacrilegious to me or something. So I'm eschewing all convention in terms of releasing, when you're supposed to release cadence and all the rules that people like you are so much more advanced in this world have taught me. But I think the audience is, forgiving me because they like the product, hopefully. So
I think so. I think it works. And then I'm genuinely curious, like, what are you looking to invest in these days, or what are the things within companies that are fascinating to you and kind of?
Yeah, that's like a thing I've been thinking a lot about, actually, is like how the investing fits in. And like, I always think it's important to like go with your intuition and the flow or whatever. But something I struggle with is like, do I want to create like some scaled media? Because I know I don't want to be an influencer long term. I know that.
Sure.
So if I know that, there are like a few different options. And it's really 2. One is like, do I try to create like a scaled media thing with like other co-hosts or whatever? And I realize this is all predicated on me being an individual contributor for a while.
Yeah.
But do I try to do that eventually? Or is this like the top of the funnel for like some really interesting investment strategy? And then what role do I play in that investment strategy? Because there are aspects of investing that I absolutely love. And then there are other aspects that I could quite honestly do without that give me a stomach ache. They're just stressful.
Yeah.
And so figuring out what I want to do there, theoretically a top of the funnel show and some sort of investment / maybe doing it early and like incubating cool projects with the ideas you express on the show, and maybe even having a kind of a little lab space or like, place where we can like tinker and build shit, I think would be really cool. But
that's super cool.
I'm not there yet, so I just don't know. But I've been thinking about that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see what 2024 brings. We'll be closely collaborating along the way.
Definitely, man. I'm excited to see what it brings for you too. You got a lot of exciting.
We got a lot of new updates as well, which no one knows about yet, but soon enough will come out.
Soon enough, yeah.
Jesse, thank you for coming on.
Zach, I appreciate it, man.
It's been a great conversation. Also, it's fun for me to just like chat with you about all these things. We don't get a lot of chances to chat about these things that I'm genuinely curious about.
It's more you just helping me when I'm in need. Like, you bailed me out so many times, man. I'm so grateful for everything you've done. Like, really, like, there are a few people where like I'll just do whatever you ask of me, and like you're in there, so you're up. It's really
that's good to know.
Yeah,
I can take your car out for a spin after this.
Right now, you don't want to. It's about to explode. Yeah. It's like fuming.
Maybe next time. All right, Jesse.
All right,
appreciate it, brother.
Thank you, man. Thanks, Zach.